What is up, guys? I'm Kel, Red Zone MTG, and today I have another Oathbreaker deck tech. Today we are covering Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, and his signature spell, Thoughtcast. Now, if you couldn't guess by the theme of these two cards, this is kind of like an affinity style deck, sort of. It's more of like a go big, play some big beefy artifacts and or colorless dudes and smash in. It's actually like a ton of fun to play and one of my favorite Oathbreaker decks currently to pilot. The Oathbreaker is Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge. He is the most metal of all Magic the Gathering characters. He is a 6-drop legendary Planeswalker Tezzeret for 4 of any, blue-black, 5 starting loyalty. He has a passive ability that says creature and Planeswalker spells you cast have affinity for artifacts, and we're really going to be playing on that. We have a bunch of artifacts in the deck and a bunch of really expensive creature spells to play, and some pretty good other Planeswalkers to play, specifically all of the best Tezzeret cards, and that's a really, really good ability. We kind of want to have Tezzeret on the field just so we can take advantage of that. His +2 is he deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of artifacts you control and you gain X life, which is pretty sweet. Hitting all of the opponents is always very, very good in multiplayer formats like Oathbreaker. He has a -3 of return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Also pretty good, though a lot of our big, beefy artifacts get shuffled back into our deck anyway, but I digress. And has a -8 of exile the top 10 cards of your library, put all artifact cards from among them onto the battlefield, which is really, really sweet. And his signature spell is Thoughtcast, as you can see here. Thoughtcast is a sorcery for 4 of any and a blue. It has affinity for artifacts, and it says draw 2 cards. And if you don't know what affinity for artifacts is, it basically means that this spell costs 1 less to cast for each artifact you control. So the more artifacts you have, the less this costs, and that does affect the tax that you pay from casting this from your command zone. So, you know, you cast this the first time, it costs 4 of any and a blue, subtracted by the number of artifacts you control, and the next time you cast it, you'll still have to pay the tax, like the signature spell tax, but affinity for artifacts will reduce the tax, which is really sweet. Typically, I like to start off with the nuts and bolts cards, but this time we're going to start with the beef here. We're going to start strong. So we run Wurmcoil Engine, a very, very good, efficient beater for any sort of artifact style deck. And, you know, almost any deck in general, you can slam Wurmcoil into like anything. He's a 6/6 Death Touch lifelink for 6 of any. And when he dies, you get a 3/3 with Death Touch and a 3/3 with lifelink. Just a classic card. Awesome Raymond Swanland artwork, just windmill slam in my opinion. I also run Darksteel and Blightsteel Colossus. These guys are our big artifact dudes that we want to ramp into. They are both 11/11s with Trample. The Blightsteel Colossus has Infect, which is crazy. They both have Indestructible, and when they would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle it back into your deck. These guys are awesome. Blightsteel Colossus has gotten to a ridiculous price these days, so if you can't get a Blightsteel Colossus, Darksteel Colossus is a pretty good budget alternative. He's still kind of a spendy card. Next up, we have our 2 Eldrazi bros, Ulamog the Infinite Gyre and Kozilek Butcher of Truth. These guys are both awesome. They both have cast triggers. Ulamog, when you cast him, you get to destroy a permanent. Kozilek, when you cast him, you get to draw 4 cards. They both have Annihilator 4, so when they attack, the defending player sacrifices 4 permanents, which is pretty crazy. Ulamog has Indestructible as well, and they're kind of like the Colossus dudes. When they die, you shuffle them back into your library, except you also shuffle your graveyard back into your library as well with these guys. So, you know, these are pretty ideal cards that you want to ramp into and make use of the affinity clause that Tezzeret gives. And then finally, we have Walking Ballista. This card is sweet. Having this reduced, or having this guy have infinity, is pretty crazy. You can kind of stack up a lot of counters on it. It's a 0/0 for XX. He enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters. You can pay 4 and put a counter on him, and you can remove a counter and deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Really, really, really good. Now that we've gotten through all of the beef, let's start talking about some of the Planeswalkers. Specifically, all of the Tezzerets that we're running. We're running all of my favorite Tezzeret cards. I think all of these cards are sweet, and they are good enough to be an Oathbreaker in their own right, especially Tezzeret the Seeker. I think he has some really cool stuff going on there. But we have Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas. This is the blue-black one, or the other blue-black one. 2 of any, a blue and a black, 3 starting loyalty. His +1 is you get to look at the top 5 cards of your library. You get to pick an artifact from among them, put it into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom of your library in any order. He has a -1 of you get to make an artifact a 5/5 creature just permanently, which is pretty cool. And he has a -4 of target player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is twice the number of artifacts you control. So it's kind of like Master of the Bridges +2, but it only hits one player, but it hits him for double, which is pretty sweet. I really like the Agent of Bullets. I think if you're doing like 1v1 Oathbreaker, he might be a little bit better, but I'm not sure. It'd be kind of a different deck because you don't get the affinity stuff that Master of the Bridge has. Next up we have Tezzeret Artifice Master. This guy's a pretty good value Tezzeret. 3 of any, double blue, 5 starting loyalty, +1 you get to create a 1/1 flying Thopter, which is pretty cool. His 0 is you draw a card, and then if you have 3 or more artifacts, you draw 2 cards instead. So pretty sweet, just drawing 2 cards for nothing. That's pretty good. I don't know, I think I like that a little bit more than like Jace the Mind Sculptor's Brainstorm ability. At least you get 2 cards off of this. And then he has a -9, which I've never seen happen, but you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your end step, search your library for a permanent card, put it onto the battlefield, and shuffle your library. So if you can get up to that -9, you just start dropping Colossuses and Titans, and it is a grand old time. Well, like I said, I've never gotten up to that before. People always kill him on the spot, but I think he's still pretty good. And then finally, Tezzeret the Seeker, the classic, the OG Tezzeret. He's another 5-drop Tezzeret, 3 of any, 2 blue, +1 untap 2 artifacts. Really good, especially if you have mana rocks that add more than 1 mana. Like, you know, you'll see what we got. It's pretty sweet. He has a -X if you get to search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. We can do some pretty sweet stuff with this, especially with the new Mox Tantalite. You can -0 and then just go get the Mox and slap it right into the field, which is pretty sweet. He has a -5 of artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. So if you can get up to 5, which is pretty easy because he starts out with 4 and he has a +1, then you can kind of like do this artifact overrun kind of thing where you turn all your dudes into 5/5s. Which, you know, I've actually won games with that before. Not with this specific deck, but in Cube and other stuff like that. So I think it's pretty sweet. Alright, so you've seen the beef. Let's talk about ways to cheat the beef into play other than using the affinity ability from Master of the Bridge. First up we have Show and Tell. This is a sorcery for 2 of any and a blue. This is a classic card. Each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land from their hand onto the battlefield. This is kind of a iffy card, you know, but if you have a way to give your dude haste, you know, like Lightning Greaves or something like that, it can be really sweet. You can drop one of your big old Colossi or a Titan and hope your opponent doesn't have anything bigger. This is Oathbreaker, so Emrakul the Aeon's Torn is banned, otherwise we would be running it in this deck, so you don't have to worry about that, but there is some, you know, pretty scary stuff out there. I think Show and Tell is just a really fun card. And then also I have a less risky card, Master Transmuter. This is one of my favorite cards of all time with really, really gorgeous artwork. There we go. I got a close-up of the art there for you. I'm going to zoom back out. But Master Transmuter, she's an artifact creature, 1/2 for 3 of any and a blue. She's a human artificer, which doesn't really matter for this deck, but her ability is amazing. For a blue and tapper, you can return an artifact you control to its owner's hand. Then you may put an artifact from your hand directly into play, and that is super sweet. So you can return your, I don't know, your mana rock or whatever back to your hand, your artifact land, and you can drop a Blightsteel Colossus, which is pretty sweet. The only downside to this, and it's not really even a downside, but you can't put any of the Eldrazi Titans because they're, you know, they're not artifacts. Next up, I run one of the new cards from Modern Horizons, Mirrodin Besiege. This is an enchantment for 2 of any and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, choose Mirren or Phyrexian. Basically, we're going to be choosing Mirren almost all the time. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token, and that is amazing with Tezzeret Master of the Bridge because, you know, all of our dudes will have affinity. So the more artifacts we have on the field, the cheaper they cost. So this is kind of like a ramp spell, you know? Every single time we cast a spell, we get a little dude, and that dude can, you know, chump block for us or whatever, and it also reduces the cost of all of the creatures and planeswalkers in our hand, which is sweet. And then the Phyrexian ability is pretty good. I almost never choose this. It says, at the beginning of your end step, draw a card, then discard a card. Then if there are 15 or more cards in your graveyard, target opponent loses the game. I think it's really cool, but we have a lot of cards. Well, rather, we have 2 specific cards that if we discard them into the graveyard, they shuffle back up our library into our deck. So or if someone like mills them or something like that, or makes us discard them, shuffles our library and our graveyard back together. So they can kind of like hose us with that. It's kind of like a Nambo with the Eldrazi Titan. So that's kind of why like the Mirren is a little more appropriate for this deck, and it also helps with our strategy. Baleful Strix is an auto-include, in my opinion, to any blue-black, almost any blue-black deck. I was going to say any blue-black artifact deck, but basically any blue-black deck. 1/1 Flying Death Touch for 2 when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. That's it. It's just so efficient. Draws you card, basically replaces itself and kills a thing. Absolutely, you know, slam dunk. And also slam dunk, we have Demonic Tutor. You know, for 2 mana, you get to search your library for any card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Just windmill slam. If you're playing black, you should probably be playing Demonic Tutor. And then we also run Fabricate in this deck, kind of like Demonic Tutor, but we can only get an artifact, and it costs 2 of any and a blue. Still pretty solid, and I am running this over cards like Trinket Mage and Treasure Mage and all that kind of stuff. Just getting any artifact I think is better than having a 2/2 body, though, you know, it's debatable, honestly. Next up, we have some removal, and I am including Hex Parasite as removal. It is a 1/1 for 1 artifact creature insect. You can pay X and a Phyrexian black, so you can pay either 2 life or a black mana. Remove up to X counters from target permanent. For each counter removed this way, Hex Parasite gets +1/+0 until end of turn. This card kills Oathbreakers. You can just remove all of the loyalty counters from your opponent's Oathbreaker and just kill them. I love this card quite a bit. We're going to be ramping a lot, so we're going to have a lot of mana. This card, just, you know, repeatable Oathbreaker killer. I think this is a really, really, really good card for the format. Also, we run Oblivion Stone, 3-drop. You can pay 4 and tap it and put a fate counter on a permanent. You can pay 5 and tap it and sack it, and destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it. Then remove all fate counters from all permanents. And, you know, we can recur this with any of our artifact recursion, getting it back into our hand, and then doing it again. This is why I like Oblivion Stone over stuff like All Is Dust. Similarly, I run Nevinyrral's Disc. It's 4-drop, enters the battlefield tapped. You can pay 1 and tap it and destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. You know, very, very similar to the Oblivion Stone, though if you can give the disc indestructible, it doesn't sack itself, it just says destroy. So you can just keep doing that over and over again if you can somehow give the disc indestructible, which I think is hilarious. And then we just run classic Damnation. You know, destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated for 2 and double black. Next up, I have Mirage Mirror and Phyrexian Metamorph. These are just basically copy cards that let us copy whatever we want for the most part. And I really like them because they add a lot of flexibility to the deck without going too overboard on copy mechanics like sometimes I tend to do. Mirage Mirror is a 3-drop artifact. You can pay 2 and it becomes a copy of target artifact, creature, enchantment, or land until end of turn. But it doesn't retain that ability, so it only becomes one thing for the turn, which is still pretty cool. You know, you can pick basically anything except for like a Planeswalker, which is sweet. One of my favorite things I've ever done is I've had someone cast, was it Omniscience? They cast Omniscience, and I Mirage Mirrored, like had it in my hand, played Mirage Mirrored, copied it, and then was able to drop all of my Eldrazi and just smash them. It was really, really good. So yeah, Mirage Mirror is great. And then Phyrexian Metamorph, it is basically a clone that can be an artifact or a creature. And you can also have, you know, has a Phyrexian mana in the mana cost, which is pretty sweet. I did mention Recursion earlier, and we are going to talk about Recursion right now. Mirror Retriever, he's a 1/1 for 2 mana. When he dies, get an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Just pretty sweet. Scrap Trawler is amazing. It's a 3/2 for 3. When Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put to the graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact card with converted mana cost less than that card, which is super sweet. So if they wrath your board with Scrap Trawler on the field, you'll get a ton of triggers and you'll get a lot of stuff back. Or if someone tries to kill something else other than Scrap Trawler, you'll get something back. It's really sweet. I like this card quite a bit. And then finally we have Crucible of Worlds. You know, it's really funny. I actually made a mail day video showing that I picked up Crucible of Worlds as well as some other cards. And people were like, why are you buying standard legal cards? They're just going to go down in price. And I bought Crucible of Worlds for like $9 or $10 or something like that. It's like $30 now. So Crucible of Worlds is, it's one of those cards that will always go up in price because it is so good in so many things. Like Oathbreaker, for example. That was kind of the point here. It is an artifact for 3, and you may play land cards from your graveyard. And we are running a lot of land cards that can sacrifice themselves. I think we're running 6 or 7 or something around that. So we get a lot of value out of our lands. Next up, we have some cards that can protect us or our things. First up is Spellskite, a classic protection card. It's just a 0/4 for 2. And you can pay a Phyrexian blue, so either 2 life or a blue mana, and you can change the target of target spell or ability to Spellskite. So basically, he protects you or any of your things that like target anything for just Phyrexian mana. It's so good. It's kind of a pain in the butt to deal with, honestly. If your opponent is like sandbagging removal spells, and you drop a Spellskite when they're tapped out and they can't use it, they basically just have to use it on Spellskite, or somehow get rid of it before they can deal with anything else. So Spellskite is very, very good. Next up we have Lightning Greaves. Gives an equipped creature haste and shroud, equips for 0, and only costs 2. So this is kind of like a must-have for this deck. We want to ramp out, drop a big Eldrazi, give it a haste and shroud, and then smash our opponent. Usually if we can get 1 or 2 Annihilation triggers off, it's just game over. Next up we have Padim, Consul of Innovation. Padim is a 1/4 for 3 of any and a blue. Artifacts you control have hexproof, which is awesome. So almost everything will have hexproof. And then it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest converted mana cost, or tied for the highest, then you get a draw card, which is sweet. So this is kind of like a protection card and a recurring draw card, which is always really good. And then finally for the protection we have Platinum Angel. This card just protects us. It is a 7-drop, 4/4 flying artifact creature angel, and it says you can't lose the game, and your opponents can't win the game. And I chose this over Platinum Empyrean just because I think it has a little bit more versatility. The flying is pretty sweet. It's a little bit easier to remove, but Platinum Empyrean says your life total can't change, and Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, actually gains us life with his +2 ability. So I didn't want to have like a non-bow in the main board. It's really up to you if you want to do Empyrean or the Angel, but I think they're both viable options. You can play both of them if you want. And finally, we have our ramp package. So I think the first card is going to be a little controversial. I am running Mox Tantalite, mostly because I opened up a foil version and I really had to see how it plays out. I don't think the card is super good, but you can kind of cheat it out with a couple cards that we have in the deck. You can cheat it out with Tezzeret the Seeker, or Whir of Invention, or maybe I cut Whir of Invention. If you're running Whir of Invention, you can cheat Mox Tantalite out with it, which I think is pretty good. Next up, I run Mox Amber. This one is also a little contentious, honestly. It's just a 0-drop legendary artifact, and you can tap it and add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers you control. And we're running a couple different Tezzerets. We're running like Padim and obviously our Oathbreaker, so we can probably add some mana with this. And at the very least, this is a pretty good card that synergizes with Tezzeret Master of the Bridge, because it'll basically provide 2 mana for 0. So it'll provide 1 for the affinity effect, and then you can tap it and add 1, which is also pretty good. These are the only 2 Moxen I run in this deck, because basically I'm using all of the other ones that I have in other decks. If you have a Mox Opal, you should probably play it in this deck, or a Chrome Mox, or even, what's the other one, Mox Diamond. Those would all be really, really good in this deck, but they're also all pretty spendy, and I don't have multiple copies of them. Next up, I have Everflowing Chalice. I think this card is really, really sweet in this deck. It is a 0-drop, but it has multi-kicker of 2, so you can pay 2 mana any number of times, and it'll have that kicker effect. And what the kicker effect is it gets a charge counter on it for every time it was kicked. And you can tap it and add a colorless mana to your mana pool for each charge counter on it. So you can pay 2, and it just taps for 1 mana, or you can pay 4, and it'll tap for 2 mana, or you can pay 6, and it'll tap for 3 mana, and so on and so forth. It is a really, really good ramp spell for a artifact deck, and even if it's just for 2, that's pretty good because it comes into play untapped. Just 2 mana, artifact, tap it for another mana. That's not too bad at all. Speaking of which, we have Talisman of Dominance. This is the blue-black talisman, so 2 of any. You can tap it for a colorless mana, or you can tap it for a blue or a black mana, and it deals 1 damage to you. Just really, really good, efficient artifact ramp. Similarly, we have Dimir Signet, and you probably already know what it does, and if you don't know, it says right there. Pretty simple. Next up, we are running Worn Power Stone. 3-drop, enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it for 2 colorless mana. Just really efficient, adds 2. Any mana rock that adds more than 1, I think, is very valuable. So, yeah, I think this is really good. One of the best targets to choose for untapping with Tezzeret the Seeker. Also, Thran Dynamo. It is a 4-drop artifact. You can tap it to add 3 colorless mana to your mana pool. Once again, one of the best targets to target for Tezzeret the Seeker. And then finally, we run Blink Moth Urn. Not exactly a mana rock, but it does give us a lot of mana. It's a 5-drop artifact. It says at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if Blink Moth Urn is untapped, that player adds 1 colorless mana for each artifact they control. This is one of my favorite cards from my, high school Magic playing days. I had a really sweet artifact deck, and back then it was actually pretty tricky because you could cause yourself to have mana burn. So I would run cards like Staff of Domination to just have mana sinks, so I wouldn't get mana burn. And nowadays, there's no mana burn. So yeah, just Blink Moth Urn, get a bunch of mana. And finally, we have our lands. We're going to go over these pretty quickly. Most of them are just mana lands, but we do have some utility lands. Prismatic Vista is a new one from Modern Horizons. It's basically a fetch land that lets us search for a basic. And we have a good number of basics in the deck. Actually, not too many. But it's still worth it to run Prismatic Vista since we are running Crucible of Worlds. Similarly, this is Polluted Delta. It's the blue-black fetch land. We're playing blue and black. We're running the Polluted Delta. Next up, Command Tower. Another pretty obvious inclusion. Just put this in all your Oathbreaker decks unless they're monocolored. Watery Grave is the blue-black shock land. I was going to call it a pain land. It is the shock land, which is, we're running the fetches, we're running the shocks. Next up, we have Morphic Pool, the Battle Bond blue-black land. Windmill Slam in any multiplayer format. Similarly, Drowned Catacomb. Like I said, we're running basically all of the good staple blue-black dual lands. So, Drowned Catacomb is the check land. River of Tears is one of the Future Sight lands. Pretty good. Adds a blue mana, and then if you played a land this turn, you add a black mana instead. We have a lot more blue than black, so adding blue as default is actually pretty good. Underground River is the blue-black pain land. I said it right this time. Creeping Tar Pit is the blue-black man land. Turns into a 3/2 unblockable. Pretty cool. Talaria West is a really, really good utility card in this deck. Comes into play tapped. You can tap it at a blue, but it has Transmute. And what Transmute does is you pay the Transmute cost, in this case one of any, double blue. You discard this card from your hand. Then you're going to search your library for a card with converted mana cost 0, because this has a converted mana cost of 0. Reveal it and put it into your hand. So you can get one of our Moxen, or you can get Walking Ballista, because Walking Ballista also has a converted mana cost of 0. This is a pretty good card to, get out Walking Ballista if we really need a finisher, which is, really, really good. And then we also have Seed of the Synod, Vault of Whispers, and Darksteel Citadel. These are all lands that are also artifacts. Seed of the Synod is the blue one. Vault of Whispers is the black one. And then Darksteel Citadel is the colorless one. But it also has Indestructible. We are also running Strip Mine because we're running Crucible of Worlds. And also I like to put Strip Mine in all of my decks, because sometimes people play with really annoying lands like Mazavith or whatever. Also, I really like Mazavith, but in any case, Strip Mine, pretty obvious include. Inventor's Fair, another one of the lands that sacrifices itself to get us value. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. It's pretty good. You can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. Pretty good, so it doesn't come into play tapped. Or you can pay 4, tap it and sack it, and you can search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. And only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So it's a tutor on a land, and if you have Crucible of Worlds, you can just do this every turn, which is really, really good. Buried Ruin, very similar to Inventor's Fair, but you get it from your graveyard instead of your deck. Comes into play untapped, adds a colorless, tap 2, sack it, return an artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Just simple, excellent, synergizes with Crucible of Worlds, just very, very good. Ancient Tomb, one of the best lands in this whole deck. Tap it, add 2 colorless, and it deals 2 damage to you. So you kind of got to be careful with that, because we do have some other pain cards in the deck, like Underground River and that kind of stuff, but it's still super, super good. We want to ramp out as hard as we can. Forge of Heroes. Not much else to say. I talk about this every single Oathbreaker deck. This is a staple of the format. You basically get to put an additional loyalty counter on your Oathbreaker when you play it, which is always really good. And then we have some swamps and some islands, and by some we have 1 swamp and a bunch of islands, because most of our spells are blue. We don't have a whole lot of black in the deck, other than like Demonic Tutor and some of the gold cards and Damnation. And that is the video, guys. I hope you liked my deck tech for Tezzeret, Master of the Bridge, and Thoughtcast. I didn't talk about it a whole lot, but we're not running a whole lot of draw spells in the deck because of Thoughtcast, being in our command zone, and we can keep casting it over and over again once we get Tezzeret out. Basically, we want to ramp out Tezzeret, then, refill our hand with Thoughtcast, and then play something big like Kozilek, Ulamog, or a Blightsteel Colossus, preferably with some sort of protection behind it, like Padim giving it Hexproof, or Lightning Greaves giving it Shroud and Haste. He is quite powerful, and I don't really like a lot of high drop Oathbreakers, but I think Tezzeret Master of the Bridge is more than worth it. But in any case, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you next time for some more Magic the Gathering content. I'll see you then.